The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber opened with a low hum that echoed through the vast hall. Inside, representatives from 47 different species sat in their designated sections, each area designed to accommodate the unique biological needs of its occupants. The chamber itself was a marvel of engineering, a dome that stretched 300 meters high, with walls that shifted colors to reflect the mood of the discussions taking place within. Ambassador Lisa Monroe walked to the human delegation area with measured steps. She wore a simple blue uniform that represented Earth, and her brown hair was tied back in a professional manner. Beside her, Colonel Jake Matthews carried a data pad containing all the reports they might need for today's session. They had been summoned to this emergency meeting without much explanation, which made Lisa slightly nervous. Though she kept her expression neutral, the human delegation took their seats in the lower tier of the chamber. They had only been part of the Galactic Council for 5 years, which meant they still occupied one of the less prestigious positions. Species that had been part of the Council for thousands of years sat in the elevated sections, looking down at the newer members both literally and figuratively. Lisa glanced around the chamber. The Rethians with their silver feathers sat to her left. The insectoid Klaxons occupied a section filled with a methane atmosphere to her right. Dozens of other species filled the remaining spaces, creating a collection of colors, shapes, and sizes that still amazed her even after 5 years of regular attendance. Speaker Talman, the elderly Rethian who led the council sessions, stood at the central podium. His feathers had turned completely silver with age, and his large eyes moved slowly as he surveyed the chamber. He tapped the resonance crystal that served as the council's attention signal, and the room fell silent. Before Talman could speak, another figure rose from the elevated section reserved for the oldest council members. Ambassador Krell of the Vortan Empire stood to his full height of nearly 3 meters. His reptilian body was covered in dark green scales that gleamed under the chamber's lights. 3 eyes arranged in a triangle on his face, fixed on the human delegation with an intensity that made several nearby ambassadors shift uncomfortably in their seats. Krell did not wait for permission to speak. In the 5 years Lisa had attended council sessions, she had learned that the Vortans rarely bothered with such formalities. They were one of the oldest spacefaring species in the galaxy, and they believed their age gave them certain privileges. His voice boomed across the chamber without the need for amplification. The Vortan language sounded like rocks grinding together, but the translation devices everyone wore converted his words into something understandable. "The humans have grown too bold," Krell announced. His central eye focused on Lisa, while his other 2 eyes scanned the rest of the chamber, a Vortan gesture that signaled he was addressing everyone present. "They expand into territories without proper respect for established powers. They build colonies on worlds that should belong to superior races. They refuse to acknowledge the natural order of the galaxy." Lisa remained seated, though every instinct told her to stand and defend her species. Jake placed a hand on her arm, a subtle reminder to wait and hear everything Krell had to say before responding. Interrupting a senior council member was considered a serious breach of protocol. Krell continued, his voice growing louder. "The Vortan Empire has maintained order in the Epsilon sector for 3,000 years. We have protected trade routes, maintained peace between lesser species, and ensured that resources are distributed according to the natural hierarchy. Then the humans arrived, barely out of their own solar system, and they claimed 7 worlds in that sector without asking permission from anyone." Several council members nodded in agreement. The issue of human expansion had been a topic of quiet discussion for months. Humanity had followed all the legal requirements for claiming uninhabited worlds, but many older species felt that humans were moving too quickly, growing too confident. Krell's claws scraped against the podium as he leaned forward. "I have tried to resolve this matter through diplomatic channels. I have sent messages to the human government requesting they reconsider their expansion. I have offered reasonable alternatives, other sectors where they might settle without interfering with established powers. Every offer has been refused. Every request has been ignored." Lisa knew this was only partly true. The Vortan Empire had indeed sent messages, but they had not been requests. They had been demands that humanity abandon colonies where millions of people already lived. The alternative sectors Krell mentioned were regions of space with fewer resources and harsher conditions. It had been obvious that the Vortons wanted humans to accept a subordinate position in the galactic hierarchy. "The time for diplomacy has passed," Krell declared. His scales shifted to a darker shade of green, which Jake had once explained was a Vortan sign of aggression. "I will make this simple so that even the humans can understand. You have 30 cycles to withdraw from the Epsilon sector. All 7 of your colonies must be evacuated. Your people will be relocated to regions that do not interfere with Vortan interests." The chamber erupted in whispers and quiet discussions. Some species seemed shocked by Krell's directness. Others nodded approvingly. A few looked at the human delegation with expressions that might have been sympathy. "And if we refuse?" Lisa asked, standing slowly. Her voice was calm, but Jake could hear the steel beneath her words. Krell's mandibles clicked together in what passed for a Vortan laugh. "If you refuse, then the Vortan Empire will remove you by force. We will send our fleet to the Epsilon sector. Your colonies will be occupied. Your people will be taken to designated areas where they can live under proper supervision. Your military vessels will be destroyed if they resist." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "Do not make the mistake of thinking this is a negotiation. I am informing you of what will happen. The Vortan Empire has fought 53 wars in our history. We have never lost. We have crushed species far more advanced than yours. Your largest warship could fit inside the cargo bay of our smallest dreadnought. Your weapons cannot penetrate our shields. Your tactics are primitive compared to our 3,000 years of military experience." Lisa felt Jake tense beside her, but she kept her own expression neutral. She had been trained for moments like this, taught to never show emotion when an adversary was trying to provoke a reaction. "Ambassador Krell," she said clearly, "are you officially threatening military action against humanity in our sovereign territory?" "I am stating facts," Krell replied. "I am giving you a choice. Leave peacefully or be removed by force. Either way, the Epsilon sector will return to Vortan control within 30 cycles." Lisa looked at Speaker Talman. "Does the Council condone this threat?" Talman's feathers ruffled slightly, a sign of discomfort. "The Council does not interfere in bilateral disputes unless both parties request mediation." "We request mediation," Lisa said immediately. "The Vortan Empire does not," Krell stated flatly. "This matter is decided. The humans will learn their place in the galactic order." Lisa gathered her papers slowly, deliberately. She looked up at Krell, meeting his central eye without flinching. "Ambassador, humanity has a saying. Don't start fights you cannot finish." Krell's laugh echoed through the chamber. "Finish? Your species will be finished. 30 cycles, Ambassador Monroe. The clock begins now." He turned and swept from the chamber, his entourage of younger Vortans following behind. Several other ambassadors also stood and left, either in support of Krell or simply wanting to avoid being associated with what was about to happen. Lisa sat down and activated her communication device. Jake leaned closer to hear. "Get me Admiral Richard Hayes at Fleet Command," she said quietly. "Priority 1, tell him Ambassador Krell just declared war on humanity. Tell him we have 30 cycles to prepare." Jake began typing rapidly on his datapad, sending messages to Earth, to the colonial governments, and to military commanders throughout human space. Around them, the remaining council members watched in silence. Some seemed troubled by what they had witnessed. Others appeared curious about how this would unfold. A few looked at the human delegation with something that might have been pity. "They don't understand." Jake whispered to Lisa. "They think we're going to lose." Lisa's expression remained neutral, but her eyes were hard. "Let them think that. Krell certainly does. He just made the worst mistake of his very long life, and he doesn't even know it yet." The council session continued, but no one was paying attention to the scheduled topics anymore. Every ambassador present knew they had just witnessed something significant. The Vortan Empire, one of the galaxy's oldest and most powerful civilizations, had just threatened the newest council member with destruction. What none of them knew, what even Krell in his arrogance could not imagine, was that humanity had spent its entire existence learning one skill better than any other species in the galaxy. Humans knew how to fight, and they knew how to win. Admiral Richard Hayes stood in the war room deep beneath Earth Defense Command headquarters, staring at the holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. The three-dimensional map showed the Epsilon sector in blue light, with 7 human colonies marked as pulsing dots. Red markers indicated the Vortan fleet positions, currently 3 sectors away but moving steadily toward human territory. The room was filled with officers from various branches of Earth's military. Commander Helen Price, his tactical officer for the past 12 years, stood to his left manipulating data on her personal screen. Captain Danny Morris, the youngest strategic advisor in the fleet, was reviewing intelligence reports on his datapad. Around the perimeter of the room, specialists monitored incoming data from sensor stations scattered throughout human space. Richard was 62 years old, and his face showed every year of his 4 decades in military service. He had fought in the resource wars on Earth, back when humanity's conflicts were limited to their own planet. He had commanded the first human warship to leave the solar system. He had hoped those days of warfare were behind his species, but he had always known better. Humanity carried violence in its history like a genetic memory, and the galaxy was proving to be no more peaceful than Earth had ever been. How long until the Vortan fleet reaches our outer colonies? Richard asked without taking his eyes off the display. Helen checked her calculations. 18 cycles at their current velocity. They are not attempting to hide their approach. 3 dreadnoughts, 15 cruisers, and 40 support vessels. Total crew complement estimated at 75,000. They want us to see them coming, Danny said quietly. They want us to panic, to evacuate, to show the galaxy that we are afraid. Richard nodded slowly. What do we know about Vortan combat doctrine? Helen pulled up a new display that showed recordings from previous Vortan military campaigns. The information had been purchased from information brokers at considerable expense, but it was worth every credit. They rely on overwhelming firepower and superior defensive technology. Their shields can withstand sustained bombardment from conventional energy weapons. Their hull armor is layered metallic compounds reinforced with energy fields. They typically open engagements with long-range plasma bombardment, then close distance for boarding operations. Danny added more details. They have never lost a military campaign in recorded history. 53 wars across 3,000 years. They have combat experience against dozens of different species and tactics. Their commanders are trained from birth in military strategy. They believe themselves to be the greatest warriors in the galaxy. And they might be right, Helen said carefully. Sir, if we meet them in conventional battle, we will lose. Their ships are larger, their weapons more powerful, their defense is stronger. On paper, we have no chance. On paper, Richard repeated. He turned to face his officers. What do you think makes a superior warrior, experience or adaptability? The question hung in the air for a moment. Danny spoke first. Experience gives you knowledge of what has worked before, but adaptability lets you respond to new situations. Richard smiled grimly. The Vortans have 3,000 years of experience fighting enemies who all use similar technology, similar tactics, and similar strategies. Every species in the galaxy uses energy shields, plasma weapons, and predictable formations. The Vortans have seen it all before. He paused. But they have never fought humans. Helen's eyes widened as she began to understand. We don't fight like the other species. Richard walked to the display and gestured at the Vortan fleet. When the galactic community discovered Earth, they found a species that was still using chemical propulsion and nuclear weapons. They saw us as primitives. They assumed we would quickly abandon our crude technology in favor of their advanced systems. He looked at his officers. But we didn't abandon everything, did we? We adapted it, Danny said, his voice growing excited. We took their technology and combined it with ours. We built ships with both energy shields and physical armor. We developed weapons that use both energy and kinetics. Richard nodded. Activate the Epsilon defense grid. Deploy the 3rd, 7th, and 9th fleets to the sector. Send a message to our colonies that civilian evacuation is voluntary, but anyone who stays must move to underground shelters within 72 hours. Helen worked her console rapidly. Sir, those 3 fleets combined give us only 42 ships. We are outnumbered and outgunned by every metric. Every conventional metric, Richard corrected. Helen, how many species in the galaxy currently use kinetic weapons in space combat? She checked her database. None, sir. Kinetic weapons are considered obsolete. They are too slow compared to energy weapons, too easy to evade, and ineffective against modern shielding. That is what every species believes, Richard said. That is what the Vortans believe. That is why we are going to use them. Danny, Authorize the deployment of magnetic accelerator platforms on every ship. I want the new penetrator rounds loaded and ready. And unlock the weapons we have kept classified. The ones from the Geneva Protocol, Danny asked carefully. We are not on Earth anymore, Richard said. The Geneva Protocol was about limiting weapons that cause unnecessary suffering and war. But the Vortans are coming to displace millions of our people, to destroy our homes, to force us into submission. I will use every tool available to protect humanity. Helen pulled up another display. Sir, the penetrator rounds have only been tested in simulations and against derelict hulks. We have never used them in actual combat. Then the Vortans will be our first live test, Richard replied. What else do we have? Danny scrolled through a classified list. The Hornet drones are ready. We have 5,000 units in storage. The Hunter mine systems are deployed along likely approach vectors. The railgun satellites in the Epsilon sector are fully operational. And we have the new electronic warfare packages that can disrupt Vortan communications. Richard studied the display again, his mind working through scenarios and possibilities. The Vortans were powerful, experienced, and confident. Those were advantages, but they were also weaknesses. Confidence became arrogance. Experience became predictability. Power became complacency. I want detailed analyses of every Vortan vessel type, Richard ordered. Weak points, reactor locations, sensor arrays, weapons placement, everything. I want to know these ships better than their own crews do. Already working on it, Helen said. Intelligence has been gathering data for months, ever since the Vortans started making demands. Richard raised an eyebrow. We anticipated this, Helen nodded. Ambassador Monroe requested that we prepare contingency plans. She said Krell's behavior was becoming increasingly aggressive, and she wanted options ready if diplomacy failed. Smart woman, Richard muttered. How are the colonies responding? Danny checked incoming messages. New Haven reports that 78% of their population voted to stay and defend their homes. Liberty Prime is at 82%. Across all 7 colonies, we are seeing similar numbers. People are not running. Richard felt a mix of pride and sorrow. He was proud that humanity still had the courage to stand and fight, but he mourned for the lives that might be lost in the coming battle. Good. Make sure they understand the risks. Make sure they have shelter and supplies. If the Vortans get through our fleet, those colonies will need to hold out until reinforcements arrive. Over the next several cycles, human space transformed into a fortress. Ships moved into position, weapons were tested and retested, and soldiers drilled until they could execute complex maneuvers in their sleep. Intelligence officers analyzed every scrap of data about Vortan tactics. Engineers made last-minute modifications to weapons systems. Diplomats sent messages to potential allies, trying to gauge who might support humanity if the conflict escalated. On the flagship Eternal Glory, Ambassador Krell sat in his command throne and reviewed reports from his tactical officers. The human fleet was deploying to meet his forces exactly as he had predicted. They were spreading their ships across the sector in a loose formation, which showed their lack of military sophistication. Proper doctrine called for concentrated formations that could overlap defensive shields and concentrate fire. Lord Krell, his second officer Drek said carefully, the human formation is unusual. They are maintaining significant distances between vessels. This is not standard defensive positioning. Krell waved a dismissive claw. They are amateurs. They lack the training and experience to execute proper tactics. When we engage, their scattered ships will fall one by one, unable to support each other. Drek studied the tactical display. He was younger than Krell, only 300 years old, and he had only participated in 7 military campaigns. Something about the human deployment troubled him, but he could not articulate what. They seem confident, my lord. They are not evacuating their colonies. They are not requesting mediation. They are preparing to fight. Of course they are preparing to fight, Krell said. They are too primitive to understand when they are defeated. We will educate them. War is the galaxy's greatest teacher, and the lesson we will teach humanity is that they are not equals. They are newcomers who must learn their place. The Vortan fleet continued its advance. Aboard those massive warships, thousands of soldiers prepared for battle. They cleaned their weapons, reviewed their orders, and spoke of the glory they would earn in this easy victory. They had heard stories of human stubbornness, but stubbornness meant nothing against superior firepower. In the Epsilon sector, the human fleet waited. Crews ran final checks on systems that their enemies had never seen before. Weapons were loaded with ammunition that would shock and horrify the galactic community. Tactical computers calculated firing solutions for scenarios that had never occurred in galactic warfare. Admiral Richard Hayes stood on the bridge of the destroyer EDS Vigilant and watched the chronometer count down. 18 cycles had become 12, then 6, then 2. Now the Vortan fleet was at the edge of the sector, preparing to drop out of faster-than-light travel. All ships report ready, Helen announced. Good, Richard said. Transmit the following message to the fleet. Today we fight not for glory or conquest, but for our homes and our freedom. The enemy believes we are weak. They believe our technology is primitive. They believe we will break and run. Show them how wrong they are. He paused, then added, and someone send a message to Krell. Tell him Admiral Hayes says hello, and that he should have taken our warning seriously. The message was sent. The Vortan fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel. The battle was about to begin. The Vortan fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Epsilon system like predators arriving at a watering hole. The massive vessels cast shadows across nearby asteroids as their engines cooled from the journey. Ambassador Krell stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Glory, and surveyed the human defensive positions with satisfaction. The human fleet was scattered across the system in what appeared to be random positions. Their largest vessel, the destroyer-class EDS Vigilant, looked like a child's toy compared to the Eternal Glory. Krell's mandibles clicked together in amusement. The humans had deployed 42 ships against his 58. They maintained large gaps between their vessels instead of clustering for mutual shield support. Everything about their formation spoke of inexperience and desperation. Open a channel to the human commander, Krell ordered. The view screen flickered, and Admiral Richard Hayes appeared. He stood on a bridge that looked cramped compared to Vortan standards. His uniform was simple, his expression tired. Krell noted gray hair and wrinkles on the human's face. This was their best commander, an old man who looked ready for retirement rather than battle. Ambassador Krell, Richard said calmly. You have entered human sovereign space with a military fleet. Turn back now and this does not have to escalate further. Krell laughed, the sound echoing through his bridge. Admiral, I'm offering you one final chance to save your crews and your colonists. Surrender now. Your colony worlds will be absorbed peacefully into the Vortan Empire. Your people will be relocated to suitable areas. Resist and we will crack your planets like eggs and scatter your people among the stars. Richard was quiet for a moment. His eyes studied Krell's face, and there was something in that gaze that briefly unsettled the Vortan ambassador. Then the human smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. My grandfather fought in Earth's Third World War, Richard said. Before he died, he told me something important. He said the most dangerous moment in any battle is when you are absolutely certain you have already won. He paused. You are in that moment right now, Krell. Then you choose extinction, Krell replied. He gestured, and the channel closed. The Vortan commander turned to his tactical officer. All ships assume battle formation. Target their largest vessels first. Show these primitives the power of the Vortan Empire. The Vortan dreadnoughts began their approach, moving with the confidence of predators that had never known defeat, their weapons charged, drawing power from reactors that could light entire cities, their shields activated, creating invisible barriers that could withstand the fury of stars. Crews moved to battle stations with practiced efficiency, each soldier knowing their role in the coming victory. Lord Krell, Drex reported from his station, the human ships are accelerating toward us. They are maintaining their spread formation. This is highly irregular. They are panicking, Krell said dismissively. They probably hope speed will compensate for their inferior weapons. It will not. The distance between the two fleets decreased rapidly. 500,000 kilometers, 300,000. The space between them filled with tension like a string pulled too tight. At 100,000 kilometers, Krell gave the order. All ships fire at will. The Vortan fleet unleashed a barrage that would have vaporized most planetary defenses. Brilliant blue plasma beams lanced across the void, moving at nearly the speed of light. They struck the lead human destroyer, the EDS Vigilant, with enough energy to melt mountains. The beam hit the ship's shields and dispersed like water hitting oil. Drex stared at his console in confusion. Direct hit on the enemy flagship, no effect. Their shields are holding. That is impossible, Krell said. Increase power. All ships concentrate fire on that vessel. Multiple plasma beams converged on the Vigilant from 6 different Vortan ships. The combined energy was enough to destroy most capital ships in the galaxy. The human destroyer's shields flickered under the assault but held firm. On the Vigilant's bridge, Richard watched his shield status indicator. The ablative foam is performing as expected. Their plasma beams are dispersing before reaching the actual shield matrix. Commander Helen Price monitored the enemy formation from her station. We deployed a chemical foam on the outer shield layer. When their plasma hits it, the foam vaporizes and scatters the beam's energy. Simple chemistry defeating advanced physics. How much longer can the foam hold? Richard asked. Another 30 seconds at this intensity, Helen replied. But we do not need longer than that. Richard nodded. All ships, you are cleared to return fire. Show them what human engineering can do. The human fleet did not fire energy weapons. Instead, each ship launched what appeared to be simple metal projectiles. The Vortan sensors detected them immediately. Solid slugs of tungsten accelerated by magnetic rails to a significant fraction of light speed. Drax almost laughed when he saw the sensor readings. Lord Krell, the humans are using kinetic weapons, solid projectiles. Our shields will deflect them with ease. Excellent, Krell said. They truly are primitives. Maintain fire. But the projectiles did not slow down as they approached the Vortan shields. Energy shields were designed to deflect or absorb energy attacks. They worked by creating fields that disrupted plasma, scattered lasers, and deflected particle beams. They were marvels of technology that had made space warfare relatively predictable for thousands of years. They were completely useless against solid matter moving at relativistic speeds. The first penetrator round hit the eternal glories, shields, and passed through them as if they did not exist. The tungsten core struck the hull and detonated, but not with conventional explosives. The round had been designed with a different purpose, based on human weapons that predated spaceflight. Upon impact, the tungsten shell shattered into thousands of smaller projectiles, each one accelerated by magnetic propulsion. They spread in a cone pattern, ripping through the Vortan ship's hull like a shotgun blast through paper. Decks 7 through 14 were shredded in an instant. Atmosphere vented into space. Secondary explosions rippled through the ship as the flechettes severed power conduits and punctured fuel lines. Alarms screamed across the Eternal Glories bridge. Hull breach on multiple decks, a damage control officer shouted. We have lost sections 7 through 14 completely. Casualty reports coming in. We are venting atmosphere. More impacts followed as human ships continued their barrage. Each round that hit a Vortan vessel passed through its shields and tore into the hull beneath. The Vortans had built their ships to withstand energy weapons, with shields as their primary defense and armor as backup. But their armor was designed to resist heat and energy, not kinetic penetration. The Vortan cruiser Pride of Conquest took 3 hits in rapid succession. The third penetrator struck near the reactor core, and the ship simply exploded, breaking apart in a flash of light that briefly outshone nearby stars. Debris spread outward in an expanding sphere, carrying the remains of 3,000 crew members. Evasive maneuvers, Krell roared. Return fire, destroy those ships. But the human vessels were already moving, following courses plotted by computers that calculated trajectories faster than any organic mind. They accelerated and turned with precision, their smaller size making them difficult targets. All the while, they maintained steady railgun fire. The Vortan weapons were designed for targets that moved predictably, that tried to use shield strength rather than maneuverability. Human ships did neither. They dodged and weaved like fighters despite being capital ships, and their weapons simply ignored the shields that the Vortans relied upon. The dreadnought Iron Fist lost main power when a railgun round severed its primary conduits. Dead in space, it became an easy target for follow-up shots that systematically destroyed its weapons, engines, and life support. This is impossible, Krell said, watching his fleet fall apart on the tactical disc. Play. They are primitives. Their weapons should not work. Their tactics should not work. Drex checked his instruments with shaking hands. Lord Krell, we have lost 12 ships in the first 4 minutes of engagement. 23 more are reporting significant damage. The humans have suffered no losses. All ships retreat to Formation Beta, Krell commanded. Activate point defense systems. We need to regroup. But the humans were not done. As the Vortan fleet tried to fall back into a defensive posture, new contacts appeared on sensors, hundreds of them, small and fast, approaching from multiple vectors. Additional contacts, Drex reported. Small craft approaching at high speed. Richard smiled on the Vigilance bridge. Deploy the Hornets. Let them see what human ingenuity really means. The Hornet drones were barely 20 meters long, unmanned craft equipped with a single railgun and enough reactor power to make short-range jumps. They had been designed specifically for this type of engagement, to exploit a fundamental flaw in capital ship warfare. Capital ships were designed to fight other capital ships. Their weapons were powerful but slow to track small, fast targets. Their point defense systems existed but were meant to handle missiles and torpedoes that flew in predictable paths. The Hornets did not fly predictably. They swarmed the Vortan fleet like insects, dozens attaching to each ship. They were too small and too close for the main weapons to target. The point defense systems fired frantically, but could not track all of them. At point-blank range, the Hornets opened fire with their railguns. The small weapons could not destroy a capital ship, but they did not need to. They targeted specific points on the hull, sensor arrays, communication antennas, weapon mounts, engine ports. They were like piranhas stripping a much larger predator. The Vortan gunners tried to shoot the Hornets off their own ships, but doing so meant firing at their own hulls. Several Vortan vessels accidentally damaged themselves trying to clear the drones. Lord Krell, we cannot fight like this, Drex said desperately. Our shields are useless, our weapons cannot track their small craft. Our armor cannot stop their kinetic rounds. We need to withdraw. Krell stared at the tactical display, unable to process what he was seeing. The battle that should have lasted hours and ended in Vortan victory was over in 27 minutes. 27 minutes to shatter the military pride of an empire that had ruled for 3,000 years. All ships, retreat, Krell finally ordered. Emergency faster than light jump. Get us out of here. The surviving Vortan vessels began charging their jump drives. The human ships did not pursue. They held their positions, still firing at any Vortan vessel within range, but they let the defeated fleet escape. On the Vigilance bridge, Richard watched the Vortan ships disappear one by one. Helen was updating casualty reports. We lost no ships. Minor damage to 4 vessels from return fire. Total human casualties. 17 wounded, none fatal. She paused, then continued. Vortan losses, 58 ships destroyed or captured. Estimated casualties between 40 and 50,000. Richard closed his eyes for a moment. 50,000 lives. He felt no joy in the victory, only grim satisfaction that humanity had protected its own. Send a message to Ambassador Monroe, Richard said. Tell her the threat has been eliminated. Tell her the Vortans have learned what happens when they threaten humanity. And tell her to prepare for the political fallout, because the galaxy just learned something very important about us. The Galactic Council chamber was more crowded than it had been in decades. Every species had sent not just their ambassadors, but also military advisors and intelligence officers. The viewing galleries were filled beyond capacity with journalists from 100 different worlds. News of the Battle of Epsilon Prime had spread across known space faster than any ship could travel, carried by quantum communication networks that connected the galaxy. Ambassador Lisa Monroe walked into the chamber with Colonel Jake Matthews at her side. Behind them, Admiral Richard Hayes wore his full-dress uniform with medals that represented 4 decades of military service. The human delegation moved to their assigned seats in the lower tier, and Lisa noticed something different immediately. The other ambassadors were watching them with expressions that ranged from respect to fear, to outright hostility. Ambassador Krell was already present, but he looked diminished. His scales had lost their luster and turned a dull gray color that indicated shame among Vortans. He sat with only 2 junior aides instead of his usual large entourage. His 3 eyes refused to meet anyone's gaze, focused instead on the table before him. Speaker Talman called the emergency session to order, his aged voice carrying clearly through the chamber despite the murmurs of conversation. This emergency session has been convened to address the recent military engagement between the Vortan Empire and the human coalition in the Epsilon sector. The conflict has resulted in significant casualties and has raised questions about galactic security protocols. The silver-feathered Rethian paused and looked directly at Krell. Ambassador Krell, you initiated military action against a recognized sovereign nation without obtaining council approval or declaring formal war through proper channels. You publicly predicted a swift and decisive victory. Instead, your fleet suffered catastrophic losses. 58 vessels destroyed or captured. Estimated casualties between 40 and 50,000 Vortan military personnel. Human casualties were minimal. Would you care to explain what happened? Krell rose slowly from his seat, his movements stiff and pained. He had been injured during the battle when his flagship was hit, and he clearly had not fully recovered. The humans fought without honor. They used weapons that no civilized species would employ. They violated every principle of modern warfare. Lisa stood immediately. Point of order, Speaker Talman. I would like to know which specific galactic laws or treaties humanity violated during the engagement. Talman consulted his data terminal. The question is relevant. Ambassador Krell, please specify which laws were broken. Krell's scales darkened with anger. They used kinetic weapons, solid projectiles that bypass energy shields. They deployed unmanned drones that attacked vessels at point-blank range. They turned warfare into butchery. Ambassador Monroe, Talman said, how do you respond to these accusations? Lisa remained standing, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp. Speaker, humanity has reviewed the Galactic Charter and all associated military engagement protocols. There is no treaty, law, or regulation that prohibits the use of kinetic weapons in space combat. There is no restriction on drone warfare. The only reason such weapons are not commonly used is because most species abandon them as ineffective against modern defenses. She turned to face Krell directly. The Vortan Empire made an assumption. You assumed that because kinetic weapons were considered obsolete, they would remain obsolete forever. You assumed that because no other species used them, they must not work. You were wrong. Ambassador Vreen of the Colthan Assembly spoke up from his elevated position. But surely there must be some regulation. Kinetic weapons at relativistic speeds are devastatingly effective. If every species began using them, space combat would become far more deadly. Lisa nodded. That is correct, Ambassador Vreen, which is precisely why most species abandoned them in favor of energy shields and plasma weapons. The galactic community made a collective decision to pursue a certain technological path. Humanity was not part of that decision because we were not yet a spacefaring species. When we joined the galactic community, we were never asked to sign any treaty limiting our weapons development. Jake activated a holographic display that appeared above the human delegation's table. This shows the complete text of every military treaty currently recognized by the Galactic Council. None of them prohibit kinetic weapons. None of them restrict drone warfare. None of them limit the types of conventional weapons that can be used in self-defense. Krell slammed his claw on his table. You exploited a loophole. You used primitive technology to overcome superior defenses. This is not victory. This is trickery. Admiral Richard Hayes stood for the first time, and something about his presence made the entire chamber fall silent. The old human moved to the center of the speaking area, and his voice when he spoke was calm, but carried weight that made everyone listen. Ambassador Krell, may I address the Council? Talman nodded. The Council recognizes Admiral Hayes of Earth Defense Command. Richard looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of ambassadors from dozens of species. War is not a game with rules that protect the losing side. War is survival. When Ambassador Krell threatened to displace millions of human colonists and destroy our sovereignty, he was not offering us a fair fight. He was promising annihilation. The Admiral activated another holographic display showing the recording of Krell's original threat in the Council chamber. You told us our weapons could not penetrate your shields. You told us our ships were too small. You told us our military was laughable. You gave us 30 cycles to surrender or be destroyed. He paused. You were wrong about our weapons. You were wrong about our ships, and you were wrong about our military. Richard walked slowly around the speaking area as he continued. Humanity has been fighting wars for thousands of years. We have fought with stones and clubs. We have fought with swords and spears. We have fought with guns and bombs and missiles. We nearly destroyed our own planet multiple times before we finally learned to work together. When we joined the galactic community, we did not forget that history. We studied it. We learned from it. He stopped and looked directly at Krell. You made a fundamental mistake, Ambassador. You assumed that because we were new to space, we must be new to war. You assumed that because our technology looked different, it must be inferior. You assumed that because we had not fought galactic battles before, we did not know how to fight at all. The chamber was completely silent now. Every ambassador was focused on the human admiral. Energy shields are remarkable technology, Richard continued. They can stop plasma beams and laser fire with ease. But they were designed by species who all used similar weapons. Nobody thought to test them against solid matter moving at extreme velocities because nobody used such weapons anymore. He smiled grimly. Humanity still remembers that kinetic energy equals mass times velocity squared. Simple physics. We just applied it at speeds your shields were never designed to handle. Ambassador Vorn, a younger Vortan who had not been part of the original conflict, stood hesitantly. Admiral Hayes, on behalf of the Vortan Empire, I must ask, what are humanity's demands? Lisa resumed her position as the human delegation spokesperson. Our demands are straightforward. First, a formal apology from the Vortan Empire for threatening military action against sovereign human territory. Second, reparations totaling 500 billion credits to cover the cost of our defensive operations and to compensate families of the wounded. Third, recognition of human sovereignty over the Epsilon sector plus an additional 3-sector buffer zone. Fourth, the immediate resignation of Ambassador Krell from the Galactic Council. The chamber erupted in noise. Multiple ambassadors began speaking at once. Krell's scales turned almost black with rage. You demand too much. The Vortan Empire will never accept such terms. We are one of the oldest civilizations in the galaxy. We have ruled our territories for 3,000 years. Jake stood beside Lisa. Then we will take what we need by other means. At this moment, human fleet elements are positioned in orbit around 3 of your largest mining colonies. We are not attacking them. We are not threatening them. We are simply there, watching, making our presence known. He pulled up a star chart showing human fleet positions. If you want us to leave your territory, you will agree to our terms. If you refuse, we will remain there indefinitely. Your mining operations will be disrupted. Your shipping lanes will be monitored. Your military will have to divert resources to watch us instead of pursuing other interests. Lisa added, we are also prepared to share our weapons technology with other species who feel threatened by larger, more aggressive neighbors. I imagine several council members would be interested in learning how to defend themselves against supposedly superior forces. The threat was clear. If the Vortans refused, humanity would fundamentally change the military balance of power in the galaxy. Species that had been unable to resist Vortan expansion would suddenly have weapons that made size and age irrelevant. Speaker Talman raised his hand for silence. The council will recess for 6 hours to allow all parties to consult with their governments. Ambassador Krell, I strongly suggest you contact Vortan leadership and explain the situation. He looked at the chamber. This conflict has already cost thousands of lives. Let us not compound that tragedy with pride and stubbornness. As the chamber began to empty, Krell approached Lisa, moving slowly due to his injuries. You have humiliated my people in front of the entire galaxy. Lisa met his gaze without flinching. No, Ambassador. You did that when you threatened us and assumed we would not fight back. You did that when you brought a fleet to our territory, expecting an easy victory. You did that when you underestimated us in every possible way. She paused, then added more softly. We did not want this war. We offered multiple chances for peaceful resolution, but you chose force instead of diplomacy. Now you must live with the consequences. Krell turned and walked away without responding, his aides following behind him. Around the chamber, other ambassadors watched the human delegation with new understanding. Humanity had proven they could fight and win. Now they were proving they could negotiate from strength, while still offering their opponents a way to accept defeat with some dignity intact. The next 6 hours would determine whether the Vortan Empire would accept the new reality or whether the conflict would escalate further. But regardless of their decision, the galaxy had learned an important lesson. Humanity might be young, but they were not weak. They might be new to space, but they were not naive. And anyone who threatened them would discover that humans remembered how to fight, and they knew how to win. 3 months had passed since the Battle of Epsilon Prime, and the Galactic Council chamber had become a different place. The atmosphere was no longer filled with the casual arrogance that had defined it for centuries. Species that had once dismissed newer members now watched them carefully, evaluating potential rather than assuming inferiority. Ambassador Lisa Monroe stood before the council once more, but this time she stood at a different podium. The human delegation had been moved from the lower tier to a mid-level position, a symbolic gesture that acknowledged their new status. The treaty with the Vortan Empire had been signed 2 months earlier, and every term had been accepted without modification. Speaker Talman called the session to order, with his customary tap of the resonance crystal. Today, we address the final matter arising from the Epsilon conflict. The human petition for full council membership with voting rights on all matters of galactic security and trade. The accelerated review has been completed and member species have submitted their positions. He paused and looked across the chamber. However, several members have expressed concerns about granting full status to a species whose military capabilities proved so devastating. The human delegate will address these concerns. Lisa stood and walked to the center speaking area. She had prepared for this moment carefully, knowing that everything humanity had fought for could be lost if she spoke poorly. Thank you, Speaker. I understand the concerns. Our weapons technology and combat tactics differ significantly from galactic norms. Some of you watched the battle recordings and felt fear rather than admiration. That reaction is understandable. She activated a holographic display showing Earth from space. My homeworld has known more conflict than most species experience in their entire history. We have fought wars over resources, territory, religion, and ideology. We have developed weapons capable of destroying our entire civilization. Multiple times over. We have killed billions of our own people in conflicts that history now recognizes as pointless and tragic. The image changed to show human cities, thriving and peaceful. But we have also learned from those mistakes. We have built international laws and agreements. We have created systems to resolve disputes without violence. We have spent the last 2 centuries learning to work together instead of tearing each other apart. When we joined the galactic community, we brought both our capacity for violence and our hard-won wisdom about when to use it and when to restrain it. Ambassador Vorn of the Vortan Empire stood, and the chamber fell silent. Many species wondered how the Vortans would respond to human membership after their humiliating defeat. Speaker, may I address the council? Talman nodded, clearly curious about what the young Vortan would say. Vorn's scales were a humble green color as he spoke. My people have learned a difficult lesson over these past months. For 3,000 years we believed our age and experience made us superior to younger species. We believed our military strength gave us the right to dictate terms to others. Ambassador Krell embodied that arrogance, and he led us into a disaster that cost 50,000 lives. He looked directly at Lisa. The humans did not attack us. They did not invade our territory or threaten our people. We brought war to them, and they responded with a level of effectiveness that shocked the entire galaxy. But what happened after the battle was equally important. He paused. They could have pressed their advantage. They could have invaded Vortan space while our fleet was scattered and broken. Instead, they offered terms that allowed us to surrender with dignity. They demanded accountability but not destruction. Vorn turned to address the other ambassadors. I do not speak for all Vortans, but I speak for many when I say that we support humanity's petition for full council membership. The galaxy does not need more species that will blindly follow tradition. We need voices that will question assumptions, challenge the powerful, and stand up for what is right even when facing overwhelming opposition. Several ambassadors nodded in agreement, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Ambassador Quillix of the Metherian Collective spoke next, her translated voice carrying a tone of concern. But what guarantee do we have that humanity will not use their military superiority to dominate others as the Vortans once did? We have seen how effective human weapons are. What prevents them from becoming the new threat? Lisa addressed the question directly. There is no guarantee, Ambassador Quillix. We cannot promise that humanity will never make mistakes or that individual humans will never abuse power. What we can promise is that we understand and the cost of war and the value of restraint. We can promise that we will always prefer diplomacy to conflict, but we will never again allow ourselves to be subjugated by species who view us as inferior. Colonel Jake Matthews stood beside Lisa and added, "Our military doctrine is defensive in nature. We have no interest in conquering territory or forcing other species to adopt our ways, but we will defend our allies and ourselves against aggression. The galaxy now knows that threatening humanity or our friends comes with serious consequences." Over the next 2 hours, ambassadors from 47 species voiced their opinions. Some expressed enthusiasm for human membership, praising their courage and innovative thinking. Others voiced caution, worried about disrupting the balance of power that had maintained relative peace for centuries. A few openly opposed the petition, arguing that humanity was too young and too dangerous to be given full voting rights. Finally, Speaker Talman called for the vote. All member species in favor of granting humanity full council membership with complete voting rights on all matters, please indicate now. The voting display appeared on the central hologram, showing each species' decision as it was recorded. Green lights appeared one by one, each representing a yes vote. Red lights indicated opposition. Yellow lights showed abstentions. The count progressed slowly. 20 votes in favor, 30, 40. The number needed for passage was 65 out of the 83 voting members. 50 votes appeared. 60. The tension in the chamber was palpable as the final votes were tallied. When the last vote registered, the display showed 69 green lights, 12 red lights, and 2 yellow lights. Talman studied the results for a moment before speaking. The motion passes with 83% approval. Humanity is hereby recognized as a full member of the Galactic Council, with all associated rights and responsibilities. Congratulations, Ambassador Monroe. The chamber filled with mixed reactions. Some species applauded in their various ways. Others sat in stony silence. The human delegation remained composed, though Lisa allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. After the session ended, Lisa found herself in one of the station's observation lounges, watching the stars through the massive, transparent viewport. Admiral Richard Hayes joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee he had somehow acquired despite being light years from Earth. "You should be celebrating," Richard said, offering her one of the cups. "You just won humanity a seat at the most powerful table in the galaxy." Lisa accepted the coffee and took a sip. "Did I win, or did we just paint a target on ourselves? Half the galaxy now fears us, Richard. Fear makes people do stupid things." Richard looked out at the stars. "Fear also makes people careful. Krell did not fear us, and look what happened. Maybe a little healthy respect is better than being dismissed as primitives." Lisa sighed. "I keep thinking about the Vortan crews who died in that battle. Most of them were just following orders, believing they were serving their empire. They had families waiting for them to return home." "War is never clean," Richard said quietly. "I have seen too much death in my career, and every life lost weighs on me. But those Vortans came to displace millions of our colonists. They came prepared to destroy our ships and occupy our worlds. We did not start that fight, Lisa. We just finished it." "I know," Lisa replied, "but I hope we never become comfortable with our power. I hope we never forget that our weapons kill real people with real lives. The moment we stop feeling that weight is the moment we become like Krell." Richard nodded. "That awareness is what makes us different. That is what will keep us from becoming the tyrants we defeated." Across the station, Ambassador Vorn met with his senior staff in private quarters. The younger Vortans who had survived the battle were present, while the older traditionalists had been excluded from the meeting. "The council elders are furious," one of his aides said. "They believe you betrayed Vortan interests by supporting human membership." Vorn's scales rippled with determination. "The elders are stuck in the past. They still believe we can dominate through military might alone. The humans taught us that strength without wisdom is just brutality waiting to be defeated." Another aide, Drex, who had served on the Eternal Glory during the battle, spoke up. "The younger generation understands this, Ambassador. We were there when our mighty fleet was torn apart in minutes. We saw our supposedly invincible shields fail. We learned that age and tradition mean nothing against innovation and determination." Vorn looked at his team, all of them young by Vortan standards, all of them ready to change their civilization. "Then we will teach the rest of our people that lesson. The galaxy is changing, and we will change with it or become irrelevant like so many species before us." Back on Earth, news of council membership was celebrated in cities across the planet and throughout human colonies. People gathered in streets and public spaces, proud that their species had earned respect through courage and capability. But in the military command centers, the mood was more subdued. Commander Helen Price reviewed requests for military assistance that had flooded in since the battle. 17 species want our help training their defense forces. 9 want to purchase our weapons technology. 12 are requesting mutual defense treaties. Captain Danny Morris studied the same reports. We need to be selective. If we help everyone, we will spread ourselves too thin. If we help no one, we will appear selfish after making such a show of defending the weak against the strong. Admiral Richard Hayes made the final decision. We help species that share our values and face genuine threats. We do not become mercenaries, and we do not give away our most advanced technology. But we will show others that it is possible to stand up to bullies and win. 5 years later, the galaxy had transformed in subtle but important ways. Humanity had become one of the most influential voices in galactic affairs, not through conquest but through consistent demonstration of their principles. They defended allies against aggression. They shared knowledge with species that needed it. They maintained military readiness but used their strength sparingly and wisely. The Vorton Empire had reformed itself under Vorn's generation of leadership. The old ways of domination through force had been replaced by cooperation and mutual benefit. Relations with humanity remained complicated, but they were built on respect rather than resentment. Other species began developing their own versions of kinetic weapons, and the galactic military doctrine evolved to account for these new threats. But the arms race that many had feared never materialized because humanity had also taught the galaxy something else important. Having powerful weapons meant nothing if you were willing to use diplomacy first. Lisa Monroe, now serving as the Council's first contact coordinator, stood in the same chamber where Krell had once threatened her species. A new civilization was about to make first contact with the galactic community, and Lisa had volunteered to lead the greeting delegation. Remember, she told her team, they're going to be overwhelmed and probably frightened. We were once in their position, new and uncertain about our place in this vast community. Let us make their introduction better than ours was. The alien delegation entered, their appearance strange and wonderful like every new species humanity encountered. Lisa smiled and extended her hand in greeting, a gesture she had taught to dozens of species as a symbol of peaceful intent. Welcome to the Galactic Council. We are pleased to have you here. The galaxy had learned an important lesson from humanity's arrival. Power came in many forms, and the true measure of civilization was not how strong it was, but how wisely it chose to use that strength. Humanity had arrived not as conquerors seeking to dominate, not as victims hoping to survive, but as equals who refused to accept anything less. And the galaxy was better for it.